But for the sake of time, let's start with a brief introduction. Most of you know Muki very well. For those of you who don't, he's a tour guide, he's an educator, he's a friend of the Mirage JCC. He is originally from South Africa, as you will hear, and he is a passionate Zionist, but we like him because he always tells us the truth about Israel, not just the truth we want to hear about Israel. And we're really looking forward to 4 sessions with him. This is the first. We'll be talking about vaccines. Next session is not next week. It's in 2 weeks. We are skipping a week. So in 2 weeks, we will have the second session, and that will be about the upcoming Israeli elections, number 4, if you're counting. The third session will be about the new Middle East, which will be about United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and all of the new, hopefully peaceful relationships blooming across the Middle East. And the fourth session will be a walk through southern Tel Aviv, a graffiti walk, which is really a lot of fun. You can see in Julie's background one of the pieces that Muki introduced us to on our last trip to Israel. So those are the 4 sessions. This is session number 1. And we're a small enough group that I think we'll be able to ask questions. Sure. You can put them in the chat until Muki's done talking, but I think we'll be able to unmute and communicate. And I think that's all I have by way of introduction. Thank you, Muki, for being with us. Thank you for staying up late or for starting your work day late. And sure. You can take it away.
Okay, so just a reminder for people, I don't know if everyone is muted. The phones go off in the background and stuff. I'm gradually getting better at managing the Zoom sessions. Thank you for the introduction. And tell me, can you see the screen? Yes. Okay. So, ahead of the curve, how did Israel get to be a world leader in vaccine rollout? We made the news in a very positive way. We are still making the news in a very positive way. And there's a question, how did we get here? Because we handled the corona crisis very badly. Israel did not do that well in handling the crisis, and that's something we'll talk about as we go through. So there is a picture of me, a healthy 55-year-old man, no pre-existing conditions, not working in any high-risk activity. And this is the 17th of January when I got my first shot. So I'm already more than a week beyond my second shot of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. That's the only one that's being given in Israel at the moment. And how do we get to a situation that someone like me, my health status, in my professional status, is already vaccinated way beyond? And we were just hearing in the chat before the session started about some of you that are waiting to get it, or some of you that have just got it, or someone who's not here right now because they went to get it. How do we get to this situation that we're so far ahead of the curve? What we can see here is Israel's failures. The one failure was we are an island. We are not to be compared with Italy or Belgium, countries that did really, really badly and that our government likes to compare us with. We are more likely to be compared with Australia, New Zealand, or Japan, or Cyprus, because there's only one gateway to Israel. A few people come through Eilat, but that's very easy to close. But Ben Gurion Airport stayed open, and every possible variant, British variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, every possible variant came in through the airport. We have a very high sickness morbidity rate. We don't have a very high mortality rate, which is partly to do with our demographic structure. We are much more like a well, we are a young country with a natural pyramid of a very small number of elderly and more young people. And it's well established that older people are more vulnerable to this disease. So we've had one of the highest rates of infection in the world, but not, thankfully, not as high a rate of death, but too high a rate of death. The third image you see is the economic devastation. The economic devastation, the number of people, businesses that were shut, people that lost their jobs, people that didn't lose their jobs but were put on unpaid leave, all the things you're familiar with from that side of the ocean have happened here as well. And as a result of all of those things, there was growing frustration with the government. We have elections, as Debbie mentioned. And I think that when we'll see going forward that that's part of the story that we have here as well. Now, why did we fail? If we bear in mind that Israel implemented very, very strict policies, and very early, we implemented a full shutdown the 14th of March. We were at home for weeks and weeks, only allowed within 500 meters of your home. Supermarkets were open, but we were advised to get delivery. Most other things shut. Two sectors in Israeli society were not as good as the rest of us at keeping the shutdown. So in the top picture, you can see a group of ultra-Orthodox men studying in their yeshiva, and you can see the attempt made to keep themselves safe. I'm not quite sure what piece of plastic hanging across the yeshiva will do. We clearly see many people sitting in a room for many hours. A part of it is that they did not take the rules seriously. Part of it is that they live in poverty and in crowded places, and many people to an apartment. Part of it is that many of the ultra-Orthodox lack basic education in sciences. Part of it is that they're cut off from the mainstream media. So they weren't even aware to the extent of the threats in other areas. Similarly, with the Arab society, to a lesser extent, those of you that have traveled with me will remember we've spoken about how Arab society have the very high proportion of much higher proportion than their part of the population of doctors and nurses and pharmacists. So they have an echelon that are educated, but by and large, the Arab population are also, they live in self-enclosed areas, were less policed, feel less loyal to the state or less committed to the state or less involved in the state. And those two sectors have been disproportionately infected. The ultra-Orthodox at 3 times their rate, almost a third of Israeli infections have been in the ultra-Orthodox sector. And the Arabs are 20% of the population and have had more than 20% of the cases as well. Another problem that we've had in Israel has been the shutting of the school system. I was mentioning to some people before, I have a son in middle school. I think between March and now, had maybe 3-4 weeks last year between March and the summer break, and then he's had about 3 or 4 days this year. He has got school on Zoom. School, elementary school, 1st to 4th grade, keep going back first. Sometimes they manage to build it up after them to the rest of elementary school. And this has been an enormous economic drain, plus, of course, the social and psychological impact on the kids. And there was a real sense that we have to hold on for the vaccine. Now, Israeli society is a society that has had many, many crises, wars. We know how to cope with an emergency situation. Israeli society was holding on, coping in these situations, waiting for the vaccine. We were told there's a vaccine, the vaccine will come and everything will go back to normal. Like the rest of the world, no one knew when the vaccine was coming. No one knew how long we were going to be able to go on with this. There are other failures the government had. The first failure was our Minister of Health at the start of the crisis and into the summer. The Minister of Health was Yaakov Litzman. He's the man that you see in the picture at the top sitting next to Bibi Netanyahu. Yaakov Litzman from the Agudat Yisrael, ultra-Orthodox party, was Minister of Health who had very little interest in being Minister of Health. He was interested in all the benefits he could accrue for his community. He himself broke the rules, went to an illegal minyan during the shutdown, contracted coronavirus, and was ill, recovered. Him and his wife recovered. There was a real sense amongst the public that the government had dropped the ball, that they weren't managing this crisis properly. And there was a long talk about appointing a project manager for the corona crisis. They call him here, it's an ironic name, or Corona Tsar, like the Russian leader. The first Corona Tsar to be appointed was Professor Ronnie Gamzu, who was only appointed on the 23rd of July. He is the head of Ichilov Hospital, the director of Ichilov Hospital, one of the big hospitals in the Tel Aviv area, medical professor, and he came up with a very clear strategy which the government failed to implement. The government failed to implement it because, and this is something we'll talk about when we talk about elections, because Netanyahu needs the ultra-Orthodox for his government. And Gamzu's recommendations, which was called the traffic light system, the country was going to be divided into red, orange, yellow, and green districts based on the infection rate in each district, and would be given different levels of movement. Whether the schools could reopen, whether the malls could reopen, and so on. As I already said, the ultra-Orthodox areas had not been obeying the general rules, and it simply was not implementable. I'm not sure that's an English word. Gamzu was supposed to do a 3-month term and then extend. He extended it for long enough to find a replacement. He left, and he has been very critical of the process since he left. In other words, saying that politics, not science, governed government decisions. He was replaced by Professor Nachman Ash on the 15th of November, but also on a 3-month term, which was to have ended on the 15th of February, but he has said he's staying on, and the reason he's staying on is because there's now successors, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Ash was the former chief medical officer of the Israel Defense Force, and he took over and has been in charge of the management of the process, but also of the very successful vaccine rollout. And that's what I'm mostly going to be talking about now, the vaccine rollout. Israel, like most first world countries, has ordered more vaccine than it needs to vaccinate every single person in the country from birth to 120. I think we've ordered 139 or 145, something like that, % of the vaccines we need. Many European countries, Australia, USA, and Canada have also ordered similar amounts. Like everyone else, there was a question of when would the deliveries come? When would we get vaccine? when we heard we were getting the vaccines, there was a lot of resistance to the ideas of the vaccine. This was a meme going around, which I'm going to translate for you. It says, Mi anachnu, who are we? Tzibura Yisraeli, the Israeli public. Ma anachnu rotzim, and what do we want? Jimtzu kisun maher kedei shenachzor leshigra, that they should find a vaccine as quickly as possible so we can return to routine. And what do we do when there is a vaccine? We oppose it because it happened too quickly. And that was kind of the atmosphere in the country at the end of November when we started hearing that the vaccines were going to be coming at some time in December. I want to just take a moment to clarify an idea that I learned more recently. There are anti-vaxxers. These are people that are ideologically opposed to vaccines, and there are people that are vaccine hesitant. These are people who are just not sure, they're not clear, they don't know, are there side effects? They're not opposed to vaccines in principle, they're just a little concerned. Turns out that in Israel, we have a lot of people, or we had a lot of people in category 2. A lot of people that were hesitant, that weren't sure, that didn't know. We don't have that many anti-vaxxers. We have, but not too much. When the vaccines actually arrived in Israel, the government, you know my opinion on the Prime Minister, they handled this very, very well. They handled this very well. There was a press conference at the airport when the vaccines arrived. It was, the Prime Minister was there, the Minister of Health was there, new Minister of Health, Yuli Edelstein, a far more competent and popular person than Litzman in the general public. They announced the arrival, they announced that there was going to be a strategy, and they announced Netanyahu and Edelstein would be the first 2 people to get the vaccine. In other words, they were saying, this is real, this is safe, this is legitimate, and please trust us, we're going to get the vaccine. At the time, there was rumored to be in this shipload, in this arrival, 500,000 doses. 500,000 doses is 250,000 people. That is not even all of the medical personnel and first responders, those kinds of people, but they were the ones that were supposed to be getting vaccine. The government also announced on day one that they would not be vaccinating people and hoping that more vaccines would arrive. In other words, if they had 500,000 vaccines, they were going to use 250,000 of them and hold the other 250,000. The people, they weren't going to do 500,000 and wait for the next ones to come give a second dose. If more came in the middle, they would give more. Sounds very nice and good, but that would leave us kind of like Europe, having just done a few percent of our population. How did we get from this situation to the situation we have today? So here is a timeline. When I keep saying the situation we have today, what is the situation we have today? On the 19th of December, which was a Saturday night, on live TV, Netanyahu and Edelstein and some of the staff, because you open a bottle, you've got to use everything in that bottle if it's a Pfizer, because it can only last for a limited amount of time, got vaccinated. And from the next day, it became a massive policy of anyone over 60. So our phase 1 was medical staff and anyone over 60. We didn't have 1A, 1B, 1C, all of these categories that I've told about when people ask me questions in the US. One general category, medical staff and over 60s. You couldn't just walk in, you needed to make an appointment. There was the websites collapsed, phone lines were overwhelmed on day 1, but I have to give them credit, within 2 days, system was up and running. By the 26th of December, by the end of the first week, they had vaccinated 280,000 people. We already understood that there were more than 500,000 doses in the country, because this is more than half of 500,000. And we understood that additional doses had come, and there were 3 million doses in the country, and the process began. By the 2nd of January, we had passed the million mark. You see 1,009,000 people had already been vaccinated. I want to draw your attention to the column on the other side of the page, where this is not Israeli, this is world records. This is how many vaccinations per 100 people in a country had been administered by January the 3rd. And you can see that Israel had done 12.59 shots. There's 12.5% of the population had already received its first shot by the 3rd of January. And you can see by comparison where Bahrain, which was coming second, where the United Kingdom, the USA was, and other countries in the world. So now it's important to understand that numbers-wise, this is not a small, we only have to vaccinate 9 million people. That's why the number per 100,000 people is a significant measure, because that's how you can compare one country to another. On the 9th of January, again on a live television broadcast, Netanyahu and Edelstein and the medical staff that had received their first dose 3 weeks before got their second dose, and the second round begins. And you can see the figures going forward, including up to today, and today has an asterisk because those are the figures as of 6 o'clock, which were the last updated figures, and they will be updated probably by about 30,000 in each of those two groups, going by the numbers we've been having daily, which is around about 150,000. So we passed today the 4 million mark of people getting their first shot, and 2.6 million people who have received their second shot. Okay, here you can see the figure of 25 people already by January the 16th. 25 people had received a shot in the country, although it's not an entirely accurate number, because what starts to happen is per 100, but some of us have got 2 shots. So it's not an entirely accurate, but that's how it's done. And this is the figure from today. And I've taken it always from the same website so that I keep it consistent. 72.58 out of every 100 Israelis have received the shot. But of course, we know that many of them, myself included, have received 2 shots in that time. We also know that there are 2 million Israelis that cannot have shots. 2 million that are under 16, and another 600,000 that are recovered from corona and are not eligible either. So the actual portion of people that have been vaccinated or have received the dose is very significant. Now, how do we get here? There were all kinds of stories and all kinds of rumors in the Israeli press and in the world press, and Netanyahu spoke a lot about the man you see in the image at the top on the left. That man is Albert Bourla. Albert Bourla is the CEO of Pfizer, a Greek Jew, son of Holocaust survivors, who rose through the ranks and now is the international CEO of Pfizer. And Netanyahu phoned him and spoke to him and spoke about his warm Jewish heart. The other guy in the picture is Tal Zaks. Talzaks is the chief medical officer of Moderna. Talzaks is an Israeli, lives in USA, and is the chief medical officer for Moderna. And again, private call from Netanyahu, and there was all talk about the special relationship with these people. Now, as you know, I've always been in education, and I've never been in business, but chief financial officers or the chief medical officer or the chief CEO of a big company doesn't make deals based on feeling warm and a good connection with the head of a country. They've got a board to answer to, that a product is desired by everyone. So there may have been these personal connections may have enabled Netanyahu to make the call. That is not, despite rumors to the Jewish connection, it's not the reason we're ahead of the curve. That's a headline that you might have seen in some of the newspapers. I took this from a British paper. Just reading it, and I feel like there's a bit of anti-Semitism kind of crawling through here. Israel paid to jump the vaccine queue. PM Netanyahu phoning Pfizer boss 17 times in just days to secure the supply. It's reported that Israel agreed to a price of £45 per dose, compared with the UK's 30. So firstly, according to the calculations, based at this £45 dose, vaccinate the entire country costs the same as it does to keep the entire country in closure for 2 days. So from a financial point of view, if it meant paying a little bit more money, it was certainly a good idea. But who are we kidding? If there was a bidding war, Israel was not going to win that bidding war. There are, Germany would have outbid us. Switzerland would have outbid us. Israel maybe paid a higher price because we were buying a smaller quantity than the EU was buying, than the US was buying, than Great Britain was buying, and so on. But this story is also not the reason that we got to the head of the line. And we're getting to that reason in a moment. That reason is Israel's public health, state health system. Now, I've learned in conversations with other people that I've given this lecture to that public health is a little controversial in the United States. So I don't want to get into that. I want to tell you about our public health system. We have 4 competing state HMOs. The first one, the one that we see up at the top over here, is Clalit. It's the General Health Fund. It's the first one that was started initially, and we'll talk about it in 1911. It was started, and about 4.5 million Israelis belong to it. Now, that's half of our population, more or less, belongs to Clalit. The second one, and this is a name that some of you at Mirage will know, it's called Maccabi. You have games named after it, and it was founded by the Maccabi Sports Union in 1941. And it's the second biggest one. It has 2.3 million people. It's the one that I belong to. Why I belong to it is not because of sport. I'll explain why I belong to it in a moment. The next one that we see on the screen, and I'm doing them in order of size, is Ma'uchedet. Ma'uchedet, which is the unified one, was made in 1974 when 2 smaller existing health funds joined together, one run by Hadassah and one run by the General Zionists, and it has about 1.3 million people. And the last one that you see at the bottom of the screen is the Leumit, the National Health Fund. It's actually the second oldest one. It was established in the 30s. It was non-socialist. Remember, in the early days, the Clalit was the socialist one. So this was built by the Herut Party, the nationalist list. They all exist. I am obliged. I have no choice. I am obliged to belong to one of them. 5% of my paycheck is deducted at source directly to pay whichever of the health funds that I elect to join. If I am married, it covers me and my spouse. If I'm married and have 1 child or 9 children, that same percentage covers my my membership and the family membership. If there is a certain ceiling where it's no longer 5% and you cap it out, unfortunately, I haven't got to that ceiling yet, but it's not 5% of everything. It goes up to a certain point. Now, why would I join one and not another? Because different health funds are stronger in different areas. In my city, in Modi'in, Maccabi is the strongest health fund. We belonged before that to one called Ma'uchedet. When I lived in the kibbutz, I belonged to Klalit, which was the one that was on the kibbutz. When I moved to Jerusalem, I was in Ma'uchedet. And once I moved to Modi'in, we belonged to Maccabi. How does the system work? Each health fund gets allocated state money from that taxation that we paid on a per capita basis, depending on how many members they have. So obviously they compete with each other to get members, but they also compete with each other to keep their members alive. Because if I die, they no longer can claim my sum of money, which means preventative medicine is very, very strong in all of these funds. So I will get notified that I need to do annual blood tests because I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, prone to colon cancer, so I get reminded about less pleasant things as well periodically, and so on. And that has nothing to do with my educational background or my level of affluence. They're interested in doing this, and I have a magnetic card. I can access from my computer my records, and anytime I go to any doctor, he swipes my magnetic card or she swipes my magnetic card, and they get my record and all the history in front of them as well. This is the reason Pfizer was interested. Just a glimpse of some of the history. The man in the image on the right is Burl Katznelson. We have visited his grave at the Kinneret Cemetery, some of us that have been there with me. Burl Katznelson was the father of the health fund. He understood that in Turkish Empire, under very, very primitive health conditions, he understood back then as well that preventative medicine was a good thing. He understood that if someone was ill, they needed to be able to be treated, and that those that were not ill would support them, and later on, everyone would get into a fund which would support whoever was ill. And as we said, in 1911, they established this relief fund, and it becomes what happens. New immigrants, you arrive in the country, and on the second day that you're in the country, or the first day that you're in the country, one of the many bureaucratic stations you needed to go through. I did it as a new immigrant. Here we see new immigrants, living in fairly primitive conditions, but there's a clinic, you get registered. Of course, in the early days, the registration was written, not computerized. Today, it's all computerized. And that is what Pfizer wanted. That is the reason that Pfizer has agreed to speed up the deliveries to Israel. And right now, I understand that we are almost 15 million doses. That's for 7.5 million people. That is for everyone eligible right now. And they're talking that maybe in April or May, they'll be able to vaccinate 12 to 16-year-olds as well. I don't know. Why was Pfizer interested in this information? Because Pfizer, the FDA, and the comparative licensing agencies in the rest of the world did licensing based on a sample of 40,000. Now, 40,000 is a very big sample in an experiment for medication. Israel is able to give real-time records 4 million people already. And that's what Pfizer wanted. And that information, which is now being tabulated and being released as we go on, it's not money. It's not Albert Bourla's warm Jewish heart. It was his business that said, if I can go to the world and show them how efficient my vaccine is, more people are going to buy it. That's the bottom line of why we got the vaccines to keep going. It's not the bottom line as to why we were so successful in vaccinating. The reason that we were so successful in vaccinating goes back to the fact that we're a very small country, a history of emergency management. Emergency management, whether it is distributing gas masks before an attack, or whether it is ensuring that every home has a bomb shelter, emergency management is a lot of logistics. And Israel was very good. It's very good at logistics. Phase 1 and week 1, we had 280,000 people get vaccinated. Week 2, we had 800,000 people get vaccinated. How do you go from 280,000 to 800,000? A first layer was the HMOs. Get the people vaccinated in the HMOs, establish an efficient system to allow people to get vaccinated. The second layer was to establish public vaccination points, hospitals, and in public squares. Those of you that have been with me to Tel Aviv may recognize this as a site that is Rabin Square in Tel Aviv, the main square in Tel Aviv in front of City Hall, which became a vaccination center. It didn't matter which HMO you came to, you belonged to, you came there, you swiped your card at the desk of the right person, then got vaccinated. And that possibility of upping the speed of vaccination was another successful part of the rollout. And here we can see what it looked like. You would turn up, get electronically registered. You can see next to each of the vaccination points, there's a computer screen. The details go straight into the screen, and immediately the person, the system knows which batch you got, when you got it, what time you got it, which would be significant if there would have been serious side effects as well. Various different models. You can see the drive-by vaccination option, which I understand is the one that's been used in Orange County a little bit as well, or in the Disney area. Well, it wasn't used a lot here in Israel. One of the great things about the HMO system is that it is a 7-minute walk from my house to the HMO that I belong to. And 2 of the others I could walk in more or less the same amount of time. The third one would be a 5-minute drive. It's a little further, the fourth one a little further away. The other element that you can see is this has been the first emergency that Israel has faced in which there was not an ambivalence of the Arabs by the Arabs. In other words, when we have fought our various wars, missiles may have landed on the Arab towns. There was always a sense of, are they part of us? Are they not part of us? They didn't always feel completely at home when Israel retaliated. This, and I've mentioned before that Arabs were overrepresented in the medical professions. This has been an opportunity where a lot of the Arab involvement in Israeli society, it has been a very good marker for Arab involvement in Israeli society. This is the only chart that I was able to find in English, and it is from relatively early on. It's from week 6 after the vaccine. Basically, there is the red line and the blue line. The red line is the age 40 to 60, and the blue line is the over 60 who had been vaccinated, the first wave. And it's very, very clear to see the kind of information that was being sent to Pfizer. How many people have been vaccinated? We see that already 2 weeks into, or almost in line with the second shot that people start to get, the over 60s, who were the most vulnerable, with the highest rates of hospitalizations, rates start to drop. Rates start to drop, and their rates start to drop significantly. Hanging over all of this is the fact that on the 23rd of March, there are elections. It was announced yesterday that starting already this week, kids went back to school. Starting next week, malls are opening, cinemas are opening, pools are opening, gyms are opening, because the Prime Minister needs a success before his, in order to win the next election. So in my opinion, it was a case of doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Doing a right thing as in his popularity ratings are still very low with regard to how he managed the corona crisis. His popularity ratings regarding how he managed the vaccination project are much better. There is a lot of cynicism about the timing of the reopening, that everything will be reopened in time for the election. We have to see, of course, the medical staff have warned us on our three previous reopenings that we reopened too quickly. So we'll have to see if we get it right this time or not. Now, there were a few embarrassing incidents, a few strange incidents in this mass project. First one was a millionth person to be vaccinated. Millionth person to be vaccinated was a guy called Muhammad Jabrin from the city of Nazareth. And we can see the mayor of Nazareth, and you can see the prime minister there, and you see Muhammad and his wife. He was the millionth person getting vaccinated on TV, in all of the newspapers. Again, the cynics would say before the election, going into an Arab neighborhood to choose the millionth person, and so on. Whoever did the groundwork didn't do a very good job, because it turns out that he had served 14 years in jail for aggravated robbery and armed robbery. And it was, probably not the person the prime minister would have wanted to pick. But on the other hand, significant that he went into the Arab area, because the vaccination rate in Arab areas has been lagging. Still lagging. It's improving, it's still lagging. Another embarrassing incident, or funny incident, happened at Sheba Hospital. Sheba Hospital decided, because a lot of the elderly people were not able to work the internet and get into the system, were unable to get slots. They said, any elderly person who comes to Sheba Hospital with or without a slot, we will vaccinate you. Just come. And then they put up the sign, which says, Nitzolei Shoah lelo zimunto מתבקשים לגשת לעמדת הכניסה לקבלת מספר. It means Holocaust survivors that have not ordered a place requested to come to the stand at the front to get a number. Now, of course, telling a Holocaust survivor to get a number is a faux pas. The sign did not stay up. Again, good intentions. The sign did not stay up very long. Fortunately, the policy of vaccinating the people continued without the embarrassing sign. And again, it's an example of Israel's spontaneity. That spontaneity was very important in the first few weeks. Because what happened was, when someone didn't turn up for their appointment, or when it turned out that they got more, they opened a new bottle for the first dose and they had 4 doses left, they would simply vaccinate whoever else was there. Famous story on day 1, a pizza delivery guy, a young guy. There, the nurse comes out and says to him, I've got an extra dose. Do you want it? He says yes. She gives him the shot and then takes his details. And what happened in the first few days is that there were Facebook groups where people would pass information on. If you're in Rehovot and you belong to Maccabi, they've got extra doses. If you're in Netanya and you belong to Muchedet, they've got extra doses. So there was no situation, certainly not the situation that I read about that occurred in the USA recently, where a doctor got fired for giving extra shots. If anything, people were, that whole Israeli chutzpah, join the list, join the line, was very much part of the idea, and no shots were wasted. Now, you'll remember I said there was a hesitancy. Hesitancy lasted first week. First week, they did 280,000 people. There were no serious side effects from the 280,000 people. And by the second week, 800,000 people got done. And the following week, a similar number. And then we had used up not what we were promised from Pfizer, but we had used up most of the doses that we had. So there was a slowdown in week 4 while we waited for the doses to catch up. Another controversy that you may have heard of is the fact that this is an article, a headline that I took from a newspaper. The article is more than a month old. The Palestinians were excluded from the vaccine rollout and jabs go to settlers. That's the way it was reported in the rest of the world. This is what was reported in Israel, that Palestinians that were eligible, is, for example, Jerusalem residents, not Israeli citizens, Arab Jerusalemites, though, that benefit from all of the Israeli health possibilities, very small percentage of them were being vaccinated. Now, just to throw some light on, according to international law, as an occupying power is responsible to vaccinate people in occupation. According to the Oslo Accords that Israel signed with the Palestinians, they are completely in charge of their own healthcare. So, firstly, that was the arrangement that Israel had with the Palestinians, according to the Oslo Accord. Palestinians had independently of Israel bought the Russian vaccine. It sourced the Russian vaccine on a different timeline to our timeline. And there was medical cooperation between the Palestinians and Israel. For example, Saib Arakat, who was the number 3 in the Palestinian Authority, died in an Israeli hospital. He was in a critical condition and he was brought to Israel. The understanding that if anyone could save him, we perhaps could have. Plus, there's the fact that hundreds, under the current reality, and thousands or even tens of thousands when we don't have corona, Palestinians work in Israel every day. And so it's in Israel's interest to vaccinate the Palestinians as well. Certain voices in the world were unable to celebrate our success and were more interested in noting the failure. Israel has been criticized of a lack of transparency when it comes to the way they handled the coronavirus crisis. The government has been blamed for locking the minutes of their meetings away for 30 years, like they do for security issues, which is a little strange. But they are very transparent when it comes. There is and the National Health website, and it gives us just, this is first week of January, how many people had been vaccinated, and the second one is today. Numbers on the column are inverse to this. In other words, 10 to 19, 12.9% have had one shot and 3.9% have had 2 shots and so on. Just to see a sense, there really is a detailed tracking of what's going on here. This is from the same website, the number of vaccinated people in the country on the 16th of January and today. And we can see the figures that I've been giving you before. And all of this is interactive. So if one goes to the website, you can pull out any of the details, which of course does not break down on the level of the details that they give to Pfizer. If Pfizer wants to know how 61-year-old men did, or how women in their 40s of Iraqi background did, they can cut this information any way that Pfizer would want it. As of the 9th of February, so just last week, the vaccine is also available to people that are not Israeli citizens. Remember, our airport is now closed. Most tourists are not here. Who are the people that this is being offered to? These are either foreign workers, for example, Filipino domestics or Filipino women who come in and work with disabled people and so on. And also many of the people who've come across from Africa, asylum seekers. You'll notice they have to come with their passport or visa. The vaccine is free. And you will not be checked by immigration authorities. Again, there's an understanding that if some people have COVID, we're all vulnerable. We weren't first on the list. As of this week, this population, as of last week, this population is also now able to be vaccinated.
Muki, can you make sure to leave a few minutes for questions?
Yeah, we're almost at the end. The ultra-Orthodox were not vaccinating at an appropriate rate. And so there was a project last Thursday night in Bnei Brak, Tulent and Rolls, like Yeshiva Bochas, go out on Thursday night. You know, they don't have to do any of the preparation for Shabbat. That's being done by someone else. And they go out. I used to go to a bar. They go out for Chulent and Rolls. And of course, under COVID, those food places have been shut. So they did a Chulent evening. If you haven't been vaccinated, come get vaccinated and get Chulent and Rolls. And on last Thursday night, a significant number of ultra-Orthodox people came in to be vaccinated. There is still a slowing because we've reached such high numbers of people. And this is my official name, Mark, not Muki. This is my vaccination certificate. You can scan the QR code. And as of next week, I can go to pools, I can go to gyms, I can go to theaters. Someone who does not have that card will not be able to go in. And it's part of the incentive to bring a few more of the vaccine hesitant people into the crowd. Of course, if they have that today, they still have another month to go, 3 weeks till the second shot and another week afterwards. Nevertheless, this is part of the situation that we are in. The top Israeli officials say we're in the final stages. The number of seriously ill are dropping every day. In fact, they reported that for the first time ever, 30% of the seriously ill are in the 30 to 50 age group. Actually, there are not more of them. It just means there are less of the over 60s, which used to be the significant vulnerable group that are in hospital now because most of them have been vaccinated. And this is one of the Israeli pictures that shows, again, in the context of the election, shows King Bibi with his crown, and his throne is built of the vaccines. And in the background, we see Pfizer airplanes landing. Because the election is hovering in the back of all of this. So why did we have a successful rollout? Because we had a good basic infrastructure, and because we had a leader very driven to get us the vaccines. The cynics say because he wants to lose the election. His fans say because he's a good prime minister. Either way, that's the situation that we're in Bibi. I'm going to switch the screen share off, and I'll be happy to take any questions that we might have.
Thank you. Does anybody want to ask Muki a question? I would like a little bit more clarity about Palestinian issue. I know that Israeli Arabs who live within the Green Line and who are members of Kupot Cholim are eligible. But what was the situation with the vaccine being sent to Gaza or being sent to the West Bank?
Okay, so Palestinians that are not citizens of Israel but are citizens of Jerusalem are treated exactly the same as all other Israelis. Palestinians in the West Bank have received a few hundred, maybe 500 or 1,000 people's worth of doses, treat medical staff as a humanitarian gesture from Israel. They're imported from Russia, have not arrived yet. The deal that they signed with the Sputnik, I think it's called, has not arrived yet. There was supposed to be a humanitarian transfer to Gaza as well. And that was disrupted because it appeared that the vaccines, the understanding was that the vaccines were going to be used to vaccinate Hamas leadership and not frontline medical staff. So the 2,000 doses, which is 1,000 people that were supposed to go to Gaza, have not yet been delivered to Gaza. There is no doubt in my mind that for normality to resume, the Palestinians are going to have to be vaccinated. So either they're going to have to get it from Russia or they're going to get it from us. I think that the Israeli consensus right now is that we need to vaccinate our own citizens. Israel knows that we have ordered more than 100% doses and that there will be doses for Cyprus has also asked us for doses. We have very good links with Cyprus, and we have a natural gas and oil infrastructure that we share with Cyprus. They're our very close neighbor. They're our favorite holiday destinations. We haven't given any to Cyprus either. It's not as loaded as it is with the Palestinians. Theories that had Israel insisted on giving vaccines to the Palestinians, we would have been criticized for doing that as well. So, but there's no doubt in the end, as we got on the 8th of February only, as we got to dealing with the foreign workers amongst us, at a certain point, either the Palestinians are going to do it for themselves or Israel's going to have to help them do it. But as we've discovered, Corona does not differentiate between whether you're religious or secular, whether you're Arab or Jewish, whether you live in the USA or you live here.
Does anybody else have a question for Muki? Something you've seen on the news or?
Muki,
Yes.
well, first of all, thank you for doing this because it brings us all back. But when do you think that Israel is going to be able to open up for groups like our JCCs?
So that the airport is now almost completely shut. Unless you're a world-class judo person who's come for the judo competition where they allowed them in, or you are Olim Chadashim, new immigrants, the airport is shut at the moment for passenger. But in line with what is supposed to start from Sunday, this coronavirus passport that I showed you my image of, Israel has signed with Cyprus and Greece an arrangement that will allow me, or one of them, to travel to the other country without a quarantine requirement if you are vaccinated. We don't know when that will begin. It's clear that once it begins with our closer local countries, it will eventually spread to countries further afield, countries that we can rely on the infrastructure that people will come with a legitimate, barcode that you can confirm that they indeed have been vaccinated. We believe the phase one will be Israelis that have been vaccinated can come back without quarantine. Phase two will be tourists from Cyprus and Greece, and they're talking about Georgia and Seychelles, or also the next two countries. I think it's based on where they are in vaccination as well. That hasn't answered your question, Dan, because believe you me, if I knew the answer, I would know exactly. I am back as of next week to guiding Israelis in the field, as well as doing the Zoom classes and lectures that I'm doing. But I'm not. We don't yet know.
I'm waiting for trip number 32.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, I'm happy to guide it. My calendar right now, just give me the dates. My calendar is pretty empty. It's interesting. I had a November group and a December group for 21 booked before the coronavirus occurred. They're the only two groups that didn't cancel, and they haven't yet canceled. And they both, in recent correspondence, told me they're planning on coming. I hope that something will come before November or December, and indeed that they'll be able to come. I think that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Tourism in Israel are working on a program. Now, how quickly they'll roll it out, I don't know, but they weren't working on a program until recently. They weren't working on a strategy of how to do this. For example, as of the beginning of this week, Israelis can go to hotels. But as of next week, I can go to B&Bs, not hotels. Can go to B&Bs. As of next week, I can go to a hotel with my wife and my oldest son, who have got the same certificate as me. I have to leave my youngest son at home because they're not allowing unvaccinated people in. And the buffet will be open. Because if you want to know, I missed the groups, but Dan, what if I really missed this? I missed the breakfasts. Like I haven't had a decent hotel breakfast since March. The perk of the job, again, if Israelis that have been vaccinated are going to be trusted, again, I guess it'll take us a while to feel comfortable doing it. But if we're going to be trusted, to not infect each other, or that the risk of infection is low enough that we can go back, then at a certain point, I don't understand why a vaccinated American or a vaccinated, European can't be eligible for that as well. But I guess everyone, that we're so far ahead at the moment of other countries that we haven't really, we've got some time to think about how we're going to do it. But the tourists have warned them. Say, if you don't allow people in, what's going to happen in the summer? Vaccinated Israelis are going to go everywhere, and there's going to be no money coming in from people coming to Israel. So there's there's an economic incentive for them to solve it as well. So not an answer. I mean, not a conclusive answer, but it's certainly something that we're following and thinking about.
Okay, I'm coming in the future, Mook. That's all I can tell you.
I'm looking forward.
Anybody have another question? I know we're at our time limit. Just really quick, do you have any anecdotal information about any Israelis living abroad who've been flooding back into Israel to get their vaccines? Is that a phenomenon?
So, well, the airports are shut now, even for Israelis to come in.
Right.
But I mean, sure, from the 14th of March or the 16th of March, only people with Israeli passports could come into Israel. Israelis could leave. They could go to Dubai. They could go wherever, but only Israelis were allowed back in. And there are stories of some Israelis who did come in to get the vaccine, people who had somewhere to stay when they were here. Because remember, when you arrived, you had to have 2 weeks of quarantine and then get the vaccine. But they shut the airport very shortly after this opened. So there weren't very many people in that category. I've got a good friend in London, who's hasn't seen his kids since March, and hasn't been vaccinated either, and asked the exact same question.
I'm thinking about it. If I have to.
Muki, when we left last time, your cousin was one of the first people in Israel, I think, to be quarantined. Is that correct?
My sister-in-law, yes, because she was on a flight with someone who'd been on the Royal Princess or whatever that boat was at the beginning, who had been on and was flying back. And then when he got here, they retested him and discovered he was positive. So they quarantined her. I've been in quarantine. We've been in quarantine 3 times.
Really? Wow.
My son at work got exposed twice, and I got exposed once at synagogue.
And you and
even though we all wore masks and sat outdoors, but.
And you and Mandy are still talking?
She goes to work. She goes to work outside the building, so all is good.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. We will.